almost all of these executives have been fired for lack in areas of communication skills, not because of technical skill.
Welcome to the podcast about communication in business. I'm your host, George Torok. Did you know that I'm known as the speech coach for executives? That's because I help business leaders deliver the intended message for greater success. When you listen to this podcast, you will gain communication insights and perspective from communication experts from around the world. My guest today is Michael D. Lisser. Here's 3 facts that I think you should know about Michael. 1, his life has been focused on leadership development and executive coaching. It started when he was a teenager while watching his father coach fired Fortune 100 executives, including custom designing and delivering leadership programs for more than 50 senior leadership teams, and his most recent accomplishment is publishing the book, Leadership Accelerators, High Impact Communication Skills that Strengthen Relationships and Drive Results. I can't think of anything better than that. And 2, Michael's greatest role model in life is, wait for it, Bugs Bunny. What's up, Doc? He watched 2 hours of the cartoon a day as a child, and to this day he still gives the cartoon character credit for contributing to his sense of humor and his positive approach to life and problem solving. That's Bugs, all right. And 3, Michael has an absolute passion for land animals and sea life that has led him to complete safaris in Rwanda, Tanzania, Namibia, Botswana, Peru, and has led him to scuba dive all over the world, over 120 dives in 3 oceans and 4 seas. Man, how do you keep up with this guy? Michael D. Lisser, welcome to Your Intended Message.
Thank you for having me, George. It's kind of fun listening to you rattle off some of those things because, it's, for me, I've always looked at the lighter side of life, right? And Bugs Bunny has helped me do that. But there's no question that I find myself in pressure situations, and I always find the humor in them and find ways to not to take them too serious. But in any case, I'm glad to be here. I'm excited to talk about just helping people improve their relationships and results through their communication skills. So thanks for having me.
Let's do that. And here, I thought we were just going to talk about bugs. We could spend the whole show with. Actually, there might be a show in itself there, just communication lessons from bugs.
There's a ton. There's a lot there. I mean, if people really look into it beyond the slapstick humor involved, there's you can learn a lot from Bugs Bunny, as anything, if you pay attention enough.
Yes, it's just looking with the right perspective. And Michael, I'm curious about those early days when you were observing your father coaching these executives who had, and he was coaching them because they had lost their job. Mm-hmm. So I'm guessing he was helping them with their maybe self-esteem, maybe dealing with emotional failure. And at some point, I'm guessing, how do they communicate their value when they're feeling way down, they're feeling low and they're feeling they're not valuable. What key communication lesson did you notice him imparting to these executives?
I think the biggest takeaway and the biggest surprise to me was how many of them struggled with fundamental interpersonal skills, and that's what got them into trouble in their jobs in the first place. It could be, and typically almost all of these executives had been fired for lack in areas of communication skills, not because of technical skill. And that's when at a very young age, I'm watching my dad at 14, 15 years old, and I'm learning about the Peter Principle, which is that concept that we get promoted to the highest level of incompetence that we have, right? And so we start out getting promoted based on their technical skills, and then the higher we go in an organization, the more critical it becomes we develop our communication skills. A lot of leaders don't do that, and they get to a point in their career where they just fail because of some communication failure. Maybe it was a failed presentation. Maybe it was responding the wrong way in a meeting. Maybe it was interpersonal inability to coach effectively or a bad habit that they had. but all of these executives were fired for communication reasons. And my dad was there to coach them, build up their self-esteem, help them find new careers, but really help them address the issues that got them fired in the first place. And so with that introduction to leadership development as a young age, I just never lost sight of I developed a passion around it because it was hard for me to understand how people could get to that level of success in their careers and have something that seems not that difficult to develop hold them back. And really it comes down to life experiences and role models and things like that got them into trouble in the first place. But we can dive into that in more detail.
Yeah, and Michael, I wanted to reinforce what you said there. It was the technical skill set that got them qualified to start their career, and because of that they were promoted to some point where they couldn't lean on the technical skills because they needed to flip and put their focus on communication.
Yeah, and in a nutshell, and companies are notorious for failing their own leaders this way. They promote them saying, they look at 10 people that are doing the same individual contributor job and they say, hey, this person's the best, let's make them a leader. So they move them away from their strength, and they don't provide the leadership development and communication skills development that these people need to succeed at higher and higher levels. So their technical skills gets them through maybe a promotion or two, but if they don't develop the communication skills, that's when the trouble really starts. And a lot of senior leaders that get to that point, if they haven't learned how to get results through others, and that's almost definitely going to be through one of 4 different forms of communication, but in any case, if they don't get really good at those different ways of communicating, it's going to catch up with them in their careers at some point.
What are those 4 forms of communication?
So as I've been looking, this is over the course of 30 years, I've been compiling lots of evidence from coaching sessions and training sessions. But in a nutshell, if you think about it as a leader, if you want to get things done through others, there's almost always 4 means that you're going to use. One is presentation skills, getting up in front of others, conveying a vision and the path forward. The second one is one-on-one coaching skills. Do you have the ability to bring out the best in others, help them in those moments of need and those moments that matter? The third one is meeting management. Can you create a team environment that brings out the strengths of everybody and creates a safe environment for people to have open discussion and disagreement? And then the fourth one is business writing. When you're putting out those messages, during massive change and moments that matter, are you doing it in a way that speaks to the underlying needs and concerns of others? And so if you are strong in all 4 of those things, you're likely to have a successful senior leadership career. Any one of those as a weakness could be what brings you down. And that, in the case of these executives over the years that I've seen being fired for communication skills, it's inevitably one of those 4 things that got them into trouble, their lack of skill there.
And Michael, when you mentioned writing, I'm going to point out or clarify for some people who believe that writing means texting.
Well, unfortunately, the over-reliance on texting has gotten people a little too comfortable and informal in their communication, which is part of the problem as well. But when I talk about business, I'm talking about business writing in those moments where maybe it's sending an email, broadcasting it to your whole team or whole organization. Maybe it's sending that compelling email that you want to make a change happen in the organization and you're sending it to senior leaders. It's any time that you're typically trying to persuade someone to take a certain path forward for the benefit of either the organization or the customer or even their own careers. And those are the kind of contexts I'm talking about. Could it be done through text? Maybe, but should it be? Probably not in many contexts. And I think people over-rely on texting when it's probably not the best form to be doing the communications that they're writing about.
And Michael, I was lucky enough in my career that at one point my boss recognized a weakness in my writing, and he set me up with a tutor to tutor me on writing, and I was amazed at what I learned that I had no clue. And one of the lessons that I learned is that writing has tone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if you're not careful, you're going to convey the wrong tone with your writing. Whereas the other forms of communication, you can hear inflections in voice and see facial gestures in writing. If you haven't really put thought into the way you put it down, it's the most misinterpreted form of communication. because there's no way to correct the context unless you're texting back and forth or asking questions and follow up. So
And often one word, a trigger word, is what can send the wrong message, totally
yeah.
destroy your message. You may have got 90% or 95% of the words right, but then those 5% that are annoying flips, it just destroys the message.
Yeah, and so I typically, when I'm teaching persuasiveness in general, right, there's three different modes of persuasiveness that go back to Aristotle, right? I mean, your ability to logically present an argument clearly, making it easy to follow and easy to understand. That's the logos piece that Aristotle came up with. Then there's the ethos, which is, establishing credibility. It could be either professional or personal. Are you helping this person that you're writing to or presenting to or whatever the form of communication? Are you helping them either trust you as a person more or trust your expertise on the topic that's being discussed? And those are two different forms of credibility building that's critical. And the third area of persuasiveness is emotion, right? So are you able to connect with people at an emotional level, speak to their hot buttons, make it about their concerns instead of talking about your own? And so typically, whether it's writing, whether it's presentation skills, whether it's one-on-one coaching, if you really want to be persuasive and connect with the other person, you need to be doing all three of those things at the same time. You have to be laying it out logically and easy to follow with good evidence. You have to be doing it in a way that shows that you care and that you're interested in them or you have expertise on the topic. And you need to make sure that you're making an emotional connection and speaking to what's important to them. And typically we miss one of those three. We're usually really good naturally at one. A lot of times that's tied to personality types. But if you can do all three of those in your messaging, you become way more powerful as a communicator and a leader because people want to follow you because you're hitting on all the things that are important to people and making it easy for them to understand.
Michael, how do you get those technical experts to wake up and start developing their communication skills? What has to happen?
George, a big piece of that is helping them realize that the result they're trying to get becomes easier to get if they get people on board and aligned with their vision, right? And so I'll give you an example. Someone who's very results driven, in a technical way or even they could be very focused on getting the task done. And in the process of steamrolling to that outcome, they may be isolating people or making people feel not included or not valued. And so you have to help them turn on the switch in their head that though it may take longer to get people on board with whatever it is you're trying to convey or get across, it's a front end cost in time that gets you a multiple return on your investment in time on the back end. Because if you get people on board, they give more extra effort in the process, right? They're willing to be on board with it and fully engage in what you're doing. If you don't get people on board, then you could be creating the resistance that you're going to have to fight later, right? And so half the battle is getting everyone aligned to a vision, getting them excited about it, getting them to see how it's important to them and the organization or whatever the purpose of it is, and then going ahead and conveying it. And I think a lot of people, they're so focused on conveying the what, they don't give the why, and that's where they get themselves into trouble.
Now, if you're my boss and you're telling me to do something and I'm saying, yes, boss, okay, yeah, I've got it, I'll do it. But inside, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying, hell with him. How do you, the boss, recognize that I'm not really agreeing with you?
It's interesting because that goes back to, are you really reading the other person, right? In terms of yes, you could directly ask a question, and say, are you in agreement with that? Or do you can ask the question directly. But more often than not, it's the nonverbals. And this is where emotional intelligence comes in, right? I see leaders with high emotional intelligence are the ones that really excel because they can read a disconnect between words and facial gestures, words and tone of voice, right? And when they detect that disconnect, they ask very targeted questions about that. It sounds like you have some hesitancy about that. Or you said you're okay with it, but your facial expressions suggest that maybe you have some concerns. Do you want to talk about those concerns? But your ability to read that and be looking for it in the first place is critical. And that's part of the challenge with writing is you can't do those things in writing. And so in the moments that matter, more often than not, writing is not the right way to do it. It's better to do it either by phone or in person or something where you can get more context, particularly if you have concerns about the other person's reaction and or it's critical that you get them on board and you need to make sure that's the case, that it's happening.
And I'm thinking about that technical person again. What tends to be the wake-up call for them? Do they have to be fired before they wake up?
I don't think it has to get to that, but the earlier they start working on their self-awareness, the more important, right? And so when you look at emotional intelligence, there's four quadrants of it really: self-awareness, self-control or self-management, social awareness, and relationship management, right? And so if you don't have strong self-awareness, then you're probably not exercising good self-control or self-management. So you don't know that you're coming across in a very pushy way, or you don't know that you've said something that's just offended a person. So it's really about developing that self-awareness. And then once you know, oh, I say things this way, or I tend to be too focused on the task and not really dialed in on emotions. Once you develop that awareness, you can work on your self-control and start to get better at the other two areas too, is reading the emotions of others. So the wake-up call for people typically is a failure of some kind, or feedback from someone that said you didn't do, I didn't like the way you did that, or seeing that down the road that people are resisting the path forward for reasons other than seeing the benefits of the task. It's more they didn't like the way you approached them, or but until you develop that self-awareness, a lot of times it comes through feedback from your boss or from your customers or someone that you start to get it. But if you're seeking feedback very early in your career, you can start to develop that self-awareness much earlier as well.
What might be a way that a person can get feedback to enhance their self-awareness? What kind of questions should they be asking?
You mean asking others, like what questions? Yeah. So, I mean, it really comes down to, there's two aspects. One is, how do you phrase it in a way that doesn't seem threatening to the other person? The second piece is, no matter what they say, you must react positively. Because if you don't react well to feedback, you're never going to get feedback from that person again, right? But phrasing it in a way that's open to them. If you say something like, look, I'm constantly looking for ways to improve my ability to be effective in my role or within the team. And if you ever see an opportunity to give me feedback that can help me improve, I would really value that from you, Or in this meeting, I jumped in and I don't always get feedback from others to find out how well that went. Could you give me some ideas about what I did really well? And let them start with that, because people can start. And then you say, is there anything you would suggest I could improve? If you could only pick one thing, what would that be? And that creates a safe environment because you're giving them the positives first. And then if you limit it to the one thing, and you frame it in a way that allows them to hear it as an open, honest request for information, as opposed to something I could get into trouble with if I answer wrong, right? And so it's really about creating a trusting relationship where people know you're going to react well, no matter what. And if they get used to you asking, you make it a pattern. Say, look, every time we do something, I'm going to ask you because I want to improve, and you're in a position where you can help me. And I really love to have you help me doing that, and build up that trust, and then you might get better feedback.
Wow, I think that phrase is a valuable one worth highlighting, Michael. Using that, I'm going to ask you every time because I want to get better and I want your feedback. And that really makes it easier for honest feedback to come in a non-threatening way, non-threatening both ways.
Yeah, and you can do that in team meetings as well. For example, if you're leading a team meeting, at the end of the meeting, you can say, what's one thing we did really well in this meeting, right? And let people say it and say, is there any one thing that if we worked on, we could have gotten a better result, or it would help us in future meetings? And if you make that the regular question at the end of every meeting, and look, you could do it anonymously too. You could send out a survey after, but you have to make sure that people know that your intention is always about improving the performance of the team or you as an individual. And the more normalized it becomes, the easier it is for people to just say something, because they see that it's okay to do that in the previous meeting and not have negative ramifications. Right?
And that also allows people that when they do notice something that seem to not go well, they mentally know, oh, there's going to be a time in a meeting where I can mention this, so I don't have to get upset. I'll just park that for now, continue with the rest of the meeting, but bring up that point later.
Yeah, the other thing that you can do, George, is you can have a ground rule almost that we all share responsibility for the quality of our meetings, how efficient we're being, how productive, how effective. And so I'm going to ask every time. And again, it's about us collectively getting better and better. So you set that expectation so that people feel like they have an obligation to share it, not, it's just a nice thing to do. And then you're basically setting up a continuous improvement environment that can spread to other things too, because once people realize that we're constantly trying to get better and better and we have a safe environment to do that, then they'll contribute more and more.
And at the same time, did I hear right that we ask for where we can get better, but we also say what did we do well in this meeting? What worked well?
Yeah, and typically if you start with that, then it makes it safer. Like for example, when I'm doing feedback for presentations, like if I have a group of people in the room, I always start it with what did the person do well, right? And I require that. And a lot of times people jump in and say, well, I think he could improve over here. I'm like, hold on a second, we'll get to that. Let's do the well part first, because you want to help the person, in many cases, if you're giving feedback, build their self-esteem or help them understand their strengths. Typically that gets people in a mindset where they're more willing to hear the areas to improve because you've reinforced some strengths for them. So it's a way to build their self-esteem. It's a way to help them recognize that you are looking for and seeing the good that they're doing before you give them one area to improve that would have the biggest impact.
And I'm guessing that addresses the emotional component, the emotional need. If you have now complimented them or pointed out a strength that perhaps they might or might not be aware of, that now they've got emotional safety?
Yeah, and that's where the routine comes in. If you make it a routine that we're going to ask this feedback all the time, or in our one-on-ones, we're always going to end this way, or in our meetings, or whatever it is, when they know that that's part of the routine, then they go into it with a mindset of, I'm going to learn something today about myself, about my presentation strengths and where I could improve. And then it becomes less threatening every time, and the psychological safety's there because this is just the routine of what we do, and it's all about helping me get better. It's good for me to hear these things. A lot of times when we're less emotionally mature in our career, we see feedback on how to improve as threatening, right? And we get defensive. And I know I was like that earlier in my career too, but I had a couple bosses that really didn't let me get away with my, feeling hurt about the feedback. And they would say, look, this is about improving and strengthening you. And eventually I got to the point where I was hungry to get feedback from anyone, because I realized that when I hear perspectives of people that see things differently because they have a different personality or different job or whatever it is, it allows me to improve my overall effectiveness. And even if I don't agree with it, I can still adapt how I communicate in front of that person to help their perception of how they see me coming across. So there's always, feedback is a gift as long as you do something productive with it, whether it's positive feedback or areas to improve.
And I suppose it would help if we each of us could come to terms and recognize that we haven't arrived yet. We're still a work in process.
Yeah. In fact, I don't like to think of, like people say, I'm going to become an expert and then I've arrived, right? No, there is no destination of expert. There is a journey that, the world is changing so fast. Technology changes, AI, you could go on about all these things. And if you sit back and think I've arrived, then you're not continually trying to adapt with the environment. So it's critical that you continually strive and don't get overly confident, but also acknowledge where your strengths are, but also acknowledge that there's always a continual opportunity to improve as long as you're looking for it.
That quality of self-awareness, what exercises might you suggest or routines might people do to become more self-aware of how they communicate?
There's different aspects of self-awareness. So for example, in the emotional intelligence framework, it's about recognizing your own emotional reactions to things, right? And so More often than not, it takes someone that you really trust who will be willing to talk to you about what triggers you. It could be in self-reflection after arguments or situations where you weren't proud of how you responded. By reflecting and saying, what was it that triggered me? And learning the things that trigger you emotionally. Learning, sometimes it's an individual and you react to that person, and if you go into the situation with a mindset of this person triggers me and I'm not going to allow it to happen today, or this situation will trigger me and if it happens, here's my alternative behavior if I catch myself being triggered. But it comes down to self-reflection, continually asking for feedback. And when it comes to communication, if you ever get a chance to record yourself, that's a huge one. Like for presentation skills, if I ever teach presentation skills, there's an absolute requirement you must be recorded and look at yourself, because they will learn more from watching themselves than from hearing me give feedback, right? And so it really comes down to embracing every opportunity you can to get feedback, to self-reflect, to record yourself, anything that'll help you improve your self-awareness. Emotionally, that's one thing. Communication habits is critical. A lot of these executives that have been fired over the years is because they had the one or two habits that really was pissing people off, like constantly interrupting or finishing people's sentences or whatever it might be. And, or teasing people in a room and not even realizing that most of the people that tease happen to be women, right? And they pick that up at a very young age and didn't realize that they're being sexist in the way they approach things. So understanding what those things are is critical, and then finding alternative behaviors to replace those or ways to catch yourself before you do them is critical. So for example, if you're triggered by a person, one of the things you could do is remind yourself that if I really want to improve my relationship with anyone, all I need to do is let go of wishing that person is different from who they are. So if I was talking to you, George, and you did something like maybe you're overly assertive regularly, instead of wishing you weren't overly assertive, I'm going to say to myself, I know George will be overly assertive in this conversation, so I'm going to go into it and be okay with that because that's who he is. And as soon as you make that transition in your head, then you're less likely to be triggered by a person, right? And so, and then even the third area of self-awareness would be knowing how your personality needs impact how you communicate with others and how you react in certain situations. If you're someone that has a high need for structure, you're going to be frustrated in ambiguous situations, or when people don't show up on time or we don't stick to the agenda. If you're more of a results-driven person, you're going to be frustrated by people that give too much detail. And so I could, but the idea is that if you can become self-aware, and these are the three things I cover in my book, is self-aware in how you respond emotionally and what triggers you, self-aware in knowing what communication habits you have that help you and which ones might hurt you, and self-awareness in knowing how your personality impacts your overall effectiveness in relationships and results in your job. If you can get good at those three things, you're on your way to a successful leadership career.
Now that sounds like a tough study to pursue. Studying how did I react emotionally? How did I react to this person? Where was the logic and where's the credibility? And how did we bump heads? So it sounds like we need to do a lot of reflection each day.
Yeah, I would argue. So one of the other things I teach is learning agility. If you really want to learn from an experience, within 2 hours of that experience, 80% of what happened in the experience is already forgotten, right, in your brain. And so it's called the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve. It's a well-known principle. But if you really want to learn the most out of every interaction, every meeting, every conversation, every argument, you need to reflect on it within an hour or two of the actual conversation. And when you do that, it's still fresh in your mind, and you can learn and remember the things that might have triggered you. If you wait more than a few hours, the likelihood of you retaining enough of what was going on in the conversation is reduced. Unless, of course, if you're taking really good notes during that and you have some kind of captured record of the event, then it's easier to recall it. But it is pretty critical that your reflection happens shortly after the event if you really want to retain information from that event or learn from it.
So let's imagine I just left a meeting that I was leading, and there was a critical project we're working on, and there were some parts of the meeting that didn't go well, and I displayed my displeasure during the meeting, and now the meeting's over and I'm reflecting. What should I be saying to myself?
The first thing I would say, and I think it begins during the meeting, during the meeting, setting a goal for yourself to come away with at least 3 things that I can apply to take this meeting to grow as a person or improve my results in some regard. So if you go in with the goal of, I'm going to come up with 3 things from every conversation, and then once you're over, you can stop and say, remind yourself, what are the 3 things, and just write them down. In this situation, I probably didn't respond very well. So write that down, and what was said was this. In this situation, I think I did pretty well and I responded to this. So you write down the 3 things you want to remember. Now you can stop and look at that and say, okay, so if that's what triggered me, what happened in previous meetings where I may have been triggered? Is there a pattern here, right? And if you're, I love journaling, I treat it as a journal. If you just write down the 3 things from every meeting, you'll start to see patterns over time that when you didn't handle something emotionally well, there was a situation or a thing that was said or a person that was common across those situations, and you could be like, oh, if that person was here in all 3, maybe it's that person that's triggering me. Or if these were the type of things that were said or the tone they were said, maybe that's what's triggering me. But you need to be capturing that information, and you will learn more. When people talk about, oh, I need to go to training to learn. No, you just need to absorb the lessons out of every meeting you have. You will learn more from that. And that's what learning agility is. It's the ability to be thrown into a first-time situation and draw lessons out of it and use those lessons to improve. And so if you can get really good at that, you will create an environment where you're learning from every conversation, and your self-awareness will start to increase much faster.
Michael, for people that would like to know more, they can read your book, Leadership Accelerators, High Impact Communication Skills That Strengthen Relationships and Drive Results. What will be the key takeaways from that book? So
the book was designed specifically to help people raise their self-awareness in these areas that we were talking about earlier. So raising your self-awareness and emotions, what triggers you, what are the situations that would cause you to respond in a way that's not effective, and then gives you solutions for how to address those things. Your interpersonal habits, communication habits is the second area the book covers. And the third area is how your personality impacts your communication. The book is designed to be a self-awareness raising tool. Almost every chapter has a self-assessment where you can assess yourself and the key concept from that chapter. Then you can run that assessment by other people, see if your perception of yourself matches a perception of others. And then it gives you specific actions and tools you can do to immediately improve in whatever area that you just learned about that you need to improve in. So it's designed to be a self-help book that kind of literally, you read a chapter, you learn about yourself, and you immediately can start to improve the minute you're done reading it, because it gives you tools and activities you can do. So my ultimate goal is to create more effective communication in the world, and I think we can all agree that the tone of communication is getting worse in the world, and so I'm trying to reverse that. So it starts with self-awareness in this book. Will raise your self-awareness in the key areas of leadership communication that will most dramatically improve your relationships and results at work, but it also works at home. A lot of times, the same concepts, I get executives saying to me, I am way better with my son this way, or with my spouse, or whatever it is, because they're applying some of these things that they learned about themselves.
Michael, imagine that I'm a team leader, and I've got an executive working for me who came through the technical side. They've been promoted and they still haven't got the communication down. So other than firing that person, what can I do to get them to improve their communication?
You have to be able to tie communication skills to results, right? And more often than not, they don't see that connection. You have to connect the dots for them. If you can explain that when you're rolling out a change, you can technically roll out that change perfectly, but there's key people that are going to determine whether that change is implemented correctly. And those are the people you have to win over and get on board with it. There's a change. I do a lot of change management training, but there's a model that I love called ADKAR. First 2 parts of it are increasing awareness and desire. That's what the A and the D stand for. if you get people to understand the reason why you need something done or why the change, and then you can get them excited about it or understanding it to the point that they want the change, then the change becomes super easy because you've got people that are motivated to want to see it get in place. And so you have to help them understand that if you don't get people on board, the change will probably not stick because they won't be on board with it, or people will feel like they weren't included, or they don't understand the reason behind it. There's a lot of reasons why changes don't stick. But if you're a technical person and you want to see a result, you have to understand that result only works if you get the key people on board and make them want to see that result work. And then you make it easier to implement whatever it is.
Good advice. My guest today is Michael Lisser, reminding you that communication skills starts with your own self-awareness. If you like what you heard, remember to like, comment, and share this podcast. Come back every week for more practical insights to help you deliver your intended message. I'm your host, George Torok.